Hi. Let's talk about some real life or kind of real life examples of credibility issues with threats and promises. And I want to start with the Mel Gibson movie Ransom. And in the movie, Mel Gibson is this sort of amoral businessman, and his son is kidnapped. And he has a lot of money, and the kidnappers say, "Give us the money, we'll give you back your son." But Mel Gibson is afraid that if he gives back the money, the kidnappers are not going to find it in their interest to give him back his son, because if they give back the son, right, the son might have learned something and the kidnappers are more likely to get caught. So this is a general problem with kidnapping. So if somebody is kidnapped, why would you pay the money? Well, first you have to think that if you do pay the money, the person kidnapped will be returned. And if you don't pay the money, the person will not be returned, will be killed. But why would that be true for rational kidnappers? You think about it, if it's in your interest to kill the person who's kidnapped, if the money is not paid, why wouldn't it also be the interest to do it if it is, if the ransom is paid? So what Mel Gibson did in the movie, it's mostly about car chases and things like that. So it's not really worth watching just to get the game theory out of it. But what Mel Gibson did was he went on television and he said, "Here's all the money that belongs that I would normally give the kidnappers, but I'm not going to. Instead, this is a reward for information that leads to the arrest of the kidnappers. And this reward is I'm leaving it out there until my son is returned." So he really tried to change the incentives to the kidnappers, because as long as the son hadn't been returned, then there would be this reward, and Mel Gibson figured that the criminals would have friends, and then they would turn on the criminals. Well, if they returned the son, the reward would no longer be valid. So normally in kidnapping, it's a real challenge to make the kidnappers' threats believable, and the way they often do get credibility is through playing a game repeatedly. We're going to do a lot with repeated games in coming videos. And if you're sort of a professional kidnapper, you do this many, many times, then the reason that you would kill a child if the money isn't paid, but release him if he is so people in the future will believe you. So effectively you're saying, look, pay me the ransom, and the reason you can trust that I will release the person if you pay me is not because I care about you or that I'm honorable, but so I have a reputation of keeping my word. And of course, this is also the reason that the kidnappers would do cruel things if they're not, if they don't receive the money. So another example of credibility, and this comes into parenting, and this is parents threatening their children. So you really, as a parent, right, kids do things you don't want them to do. So how do you get them to not do it? Well, first you ask them nicely, you bargain with them, you reason, but that doesn't always work, especially when the kids are younger. So you have to resort to threats, no dessert tonight, no television, no computer. But the kids will catch on and be like, "Are you really gonna keep this?" If you say no computer for a week, I mean, yeah, sure, today you only use a computer, but are you really gonna keep this up in 2 or 3 days when, if I'm not on the computer, when as soon as you get home, I'll be bugging you and making you play with me and nagging you to let me use the computer again? So you really have to keep, if you're making threats and the kid is old enough to realize that you might not keep your threats, then those threats become less credible. So there's one story, and this is, imagine that parents are very concerned their teenage daughter is going to get pregnant and have a child, and they really do not want this. They do not want to become grandparents. Their daughter is very young. So they threaten her and they say, if you have a child, we're going to disown you. And they're hoping this discourages her from getting pregnant. But if the parents really love the daughter, this threat is very incredible, because the daughter would say to herself, wait a minute, if I actually do have a child, it's going to be your grandkid, right? You're probably going to give me more resources and more attention than if I don't have a child. And, the parents might recognize that's true, because once she has the child, it's no longer in their parents' interest to, maintain this threat. It's also, I imagine, it's a problem with kids who are drug addicts. Well, the parents will say, you better stop, or we're throwing you out. You get nothing. You'll just go on the streets and die for all we care. And the kids are like, yeah, but the thing is, you still love me, and I don't. I think you will kick me out, and you will impose some costs on me, but you don't want me to die. And taking this into account, I can continue to use drugs, and you will still care about me. So at least in movies, anyways, one way around this for parents is if there's multiple siblings, so the parents say, look, we do care about you, but we'll throw you out to protect your brother, and that makes the threat a lot more credible. Credibility issues are enormously important in foreign policy. So after World War II, the United States formed NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, to basically defend Western Europe from the then Soviet Union. And what NATO said was an attack on any country in NATO is an attack on all of us. So at the end of World War II, the Soviets were, of course, in Europe, and we're not. And there was a fear that the Soviets would, invade, take West Germany, maybe take France, take other countries. And so we said, well, look, if you attack Western Europe, we have pledged on our honor that we will just go to full war with you. This continued even after, both the United States and the Soviet Union had massive amounts of atomic weapons. And fortunately, this hasn't really been tested, but right now, the United States is basically, for any NATO country, we pledge to kind of commit suicide. I mean, we've pledged that if, the Soviet Union attacks a NATO country, we will go to war with the Soviet Union, even though the Soviet Union Russia could kill all of us. And it's not clear whether that's believable or not. So after the fall of the Soviet Union, we let in a lot of countries that used to be controlled by the Soviet Union into NATO. And would we really go to war to protect them? There's a lot of the small Baltic countries that Russia probably wants to take control of again. They're in NATO. So we've officially said, if you invade Latvia, Russia, we're going to maybe have to use hydrogen bombs on Moscow. But, should Russia believe that? Is that a credible promise? Maybe not. It's a bit of a challenge. It's useful to be able to make threats that are believable, but if the threats aren't believable, then they can kind of get you in a lot of trouble. So imagine that you do another example. Sorry, bad transition. Imagine you work at a job and you really enjoy your job and you're actually quite good at it. And so, you work for a while and you're like, I deserve a raise. I'm really productive. You go to your boss and you say, please, may I have a raise? And your boss is totally honest with you and says, look, you're a very valuable employee, but I'm not going to give you a raise because you enjoy working so much. The boss is essentially saying, I don't need to give you a raise to keep you here. Don't make the mistake of thinking that your salary at work is kind of equivalent to your grades at college, right? We at least try at college to where your grade reflects how good you've done in class. But that's not how it works necessarily in the workplace, right? What's the value of a firm giving you a raise? It's not if they're just rewarding you. How does that increase their profits? Generally, a firm will want to give you a raise maybe to motivate you to work harder, but if you're already working harder, they don't need to do that, or to keep you there. And a big reason to give really productive employees raises is so that employee doesn't leave. So what if you really like your job? Well, the employer doesn't have to give you a raise. So maybe, one technique would be for you to go and tell everyone, look, if I don't get a raise, I'm going to quit. And this way you will lose face and you'll feel bad and maybe you actually will have to quit. So you'll sort of put yourself in a position where you'll feel obligated to quit, or it will hurt you if you don't quit. And that way maybe you'd be more likely to get the raise. There's a lot of problems with government incentives and credibility. So right now, of course, we have this enormous problem with COVID-19, and we really want to incentivize the private sector to develop vaccines and treatments, but there might be a credibility problem. What we would really like is, we were to say, look, if you develop a vaccine, you're going to be rich. You'll be, the richest company ever. But once they develop the vaccine, to say, well, actually you should probably give it to everyone for free or give it really cheaply, because that really wouldn't be fair, right? But companies will take this into account. I mean, yeah, we would like companies to work for the common good, but that's not always how it works. And even people who do care about the common good also care about themselves and their families. So again, we face this credibility problem where we would like to be able to say, you develop a vaccine and you can make hundreds of billions of dollars off of it. But once they develop it, you can be really sure it'll be like, how dare you try to profit off people's misery? Taking this into account, companies will put fewer resources into developing a vaccine for COVID-19. And we're kind of stuck with this situation. I think we might have to pay companies in advance. We might have to say, okay, please do. Normally, the way the pharmaceutical industry works is company will spend their own money, and if they don't find something, they don't develop a useful drug, well, they lose that money. And if they do, then they can profit from it. Maybe because of the non-credibility to say, hey, we promise you can profit a lot if you develop a cure, because it's pretty clear if someone has a vaccine, there's going to be a lot of pressure on them to give it away really, really cheaply. We might have to say to potential vaccine researchers and companies, hey, we will give you the billions right now. So, here's the money. You're guaranteed not to lose anything because we'll be paying for your research. Unfortunately, they means that if they do discover a cure, their profits won't go up as much compared to if they didn't discover the cure. So we'll probably have to rely upon them behaving nicely and working for the common good, right? It's generally better incentive if a pharmaceutical company knows if we develop this cure for baldness, we make billions. Well, if we don't, we get nothing. That motivates them to work harder and take more efficiencies. We can get away with that for baldness because there aren't going to be people saying, no, we demand you must give the cure for baldness for free to everybody, because it's just so horrible that if people go bald. But with COVID-19, we probably can't credibly say, yes, if you come up with a cure, you can sell it for a really high price, or you can get the taxpayers to give you enormous amounts of money. That probably won't happen once they have a cure. So we might have to pay people up front and accept there's going to be some efficiency loss because people won't be as motivated to work. This is sort of the equivalent of a college course if in saying, well, I want you to study real hard. I'll base the grade on how much you study, which is, okay, you'll probably study more if I can monitor that, but you might not be studying quite as intensely when you read stuff. You might be daydreaming. And we might get some of this with the approach we're likely to have to take with COVID-19 because, again, we can't credibly promise to give enormous riches to the firms that develop effective treatments, effective cures, because once we have them, well, then the crisis is past. We don't need them anymore. We don't need them to keep working, and we can just sort of, take the intellectual property behind the cure. Well, thank you for listening to me in this video. Goodbye.